Outlining gives your story structure. And structure gives you the little path of breadcrumbs to find your way out of the perilous forest of I don't know what the heck I'm writing. This has happened to me so many times in the past. I have started a book, I had a great idea, I love the characters, I start right in the beginning, and I'm good for maybe a few chapters. If I'm lucky. Then by the middle of it, everyone's doing random stuff, everyone's talking like a bunch of idiots, nobody knows what they're doing, the story goes completely off the rails, and then I discovered outline. So today, I want to help you also understand how outlining can help you, especially if you are a new writer, haven't tried it before. I highly recommend trying this. Some people think that outlining your story before writing it makes it predictable. They think it makes it fall flat. However, just because there's follow through doesn't mean everything has to be done the same way. The events that are going to happen and change your characters aren't going to be the same as the events that happened in this book or this movie. And that is how so many different authors and writers and filmmakers can have the same structure and backbone. Why we can have sci-fi films that follow the same premise that are still vastly different from one another and have vastly different characters. The first thing you want to do is start with your brain dump. Before you even look at the structure, before you think about any beat points or anything, think about your brain dump. This is basically just a document that you have in your writing program on your Google Docs. You can write it by hand, whatever you prefer. Biggest thing is get all of your ideas down. If you have ideas about names, world building, if you know your character's lie or misbelief, which you should have figured out in this series over here, put it in your brain dump and then see where that takes you. Say you want a scene in your book where they're on a cliff. That's all you know. Okay, so then take that idea. They're on a cliff and they fall. Man, that's a little cliche. Okay, they're pushed. Okay, the cliff's up in the air and they have to battle a monster and they end up falling off, and this one learns they can fly, and they find a cavern halfway up the cliff that lets them hide from the monster or whatever it is. And there you go. Now you've just started to figure out a scene. And from there, you can ask yourself, okay, how did they get to this scene? What needed to happen before that? What's going to happen next? Where's it going to lead? Why would they be on the cliff in the first place? Why would they jump? Why would they act the way they're acting? But all of that, all of your whys, dump them on the page. Doesn't have to make sense, doesn't have to be grammatically correct, it doesn't have to be formatted, and literally just get everything on the page. Reason for this is because once you've spit out all your ideas, once you've gotten everything you know about the story, one, this can help you determine if it's a story you should actively write, because sometimes I'll have an idea for a story and there's literally 5 sentences and I don't know where to go from there, which means this story needs to percolate a little longer in my brain, and I'll focus on this one instead. That's one reason to go ahead and have a brain dump. Another thing this helps you with is when you actually start looking at your structured beats, your story beats. You can look at your brain dump, you can look at the scenes you've had, the ideas you have, and you're like, oh, this seems a lot like what this is supposed to do in this section. And you've already outlined that. You can just transplant it right over into your outline structure. And that can save you a lot of time. Another reason that you should do a brain dump, it helps you get out of the idea that your outline is going to be a box that you're putting yourself in. And it's not, okay? The outline is just something to help you figure out your arcs, your development, your story growth, your pacing. Make sure you get everything that you want in your book, and then it's a touchstone. You start writing, you get a little lost, go back to your touchstone, your outline. If you don't know what to write next, go to your outline, and it's there for you. Because I think a lot of people, they think once you've outlined your story, that's it. You have to stick to it, and you don't. You can outline the bejesus out of it. You can have every little minute detail in there. And if you're writing that scene and you're going off your outline and you're something like, I wonder what would happen if I did this instead. Do that instead. See where it goes. But if that idea falls short and you're something like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get out of this anymore. Well, you have your outline. You can go back to where that started and you can work your way back, see what works, see what didn't. That way you don't have to erase like 50 pages of writing and be like, oh my gosh, now I have this giant hole in my novel and I don't know what to do with it. So that's how I start all of my projects. After I have created my characters and I've really thought about them, I will do my brain dump, I will put all my ideas on the page, and then I will start thinking about what structure I want to use. There is a couple of ways you can do this. In the video after this one, we are going to talk about a specific structure that I've cobbled together from multiple different outlining structures that I've tried in the past. But in this video, I want to talk about the 5 main beats that every structure I've seen has, and then also a structure that can help you layer character arcs and relationships. A lot of people plot stories in 3 acts. Shakespeare did it. The ancient Greek playwrights did it. A lot of authors, a lot of screenwriters do this. The 5 main beats that you really need to focus on. And this is where I would start. And you can add it to your brain dump, or you can make a separate document. You need your introduction. You're going to introduce your main character, what their misbelief is, how it's affecting their life, and what needs to change in their life. Introduce what they think they want, what they think will fix their life. The reader's going to know that's not really what's going to fix their life. First step, and some people call that the opening image, which can be fun to 5th beat, go ahead and flip on its head to mirror and show how far your character's come. After that, the next beat that you want in your story is going to be the inciting incident. It's sometimes called a catalyst, or occasionally the call to adventure. Think in Lord of the Rings when Gandalf brings a bunch of dwarves over to Bilbo's house to go on a quest. That is Bilbo's inciting incident. If he had never had dwarves over for dinner and they'd never put that contract in front of him, he would likely have never left Bag End. That's what pushed him to go on an adventure. Some other examples. In a romance, a lot of the times, the inciting incident is the same as the meet cute. So when the 2 love interests meet for the first time, it's generally the inciting incident. In The Matrix, the movie, the inciting incident would be when Neo meets Morpheus and he's offered the red pill and the blue pill. This is literally a moment of no return. And he could have literally just forgotten everything and gone back to his happy life. But because of everything that led up to that, he made his decision to push forward. Generally, with this inciting incident, there comes a question or a choice that your character needs to make, and it's going to be irreversible. So, for example, with Matrix example, Neo literally had to choose which pill to take. Was he going to wake up, or was he going to stay in the dream? This is going to be the same for your characters. They could choose to stay where they are, continue living the life they're living, being unhappy and believing what they're believing, or they can accept this call to adventure and they can explore forward. Now, keep in mind, they don't realize that they're going to change. They think they're going after what they want, and for whatever reason, they are choosing to go down this path. Biggest thing about this is you don't want your characters to be passive. You don't want it to be like, oh, well, there was a car explosion and they got kidnapped by these people and so they had to go ahead and fight the war. Because then it's just stuff happening to your character, and that could be anybody. Anybody could have been kidnapped and pushed into the war efforts. What you want is an active character who, while they may have had all those explosions and they may have been kidnapped and they may be being pushed into the war efforts, somehow this needs to be their choice. They can choose to just suck and not try and not work hard, or can choose to realize how it might benefit them to getting what they want for whatever reason. For example, again with the Matrix, it's a pretty obvious one. He could have chosen not to take the pill that would wake him up. And he could have stayed in his life and never become the one. In The Hobbit, Bilbo could have chosen not to go after the dwarves when they left the contract at his house, and they didn't want him to go along, at least Thorin did. He could have chosen to stay in Bag End and never go after them, but instead, he chose to accept that call to adventure and go to help them. And he chased them down, knowing he signed the contract. That was him choosing to go into the adventure. The next beat that is essential for your story is the midpoint. There's generally a twist at the midpoint. Something generally changes, and it's usually unexpected. Say the plot twist moment here in The Matrix is when the Oracle tells Neo that he is not the one. It's a plot twist because throughout the entire beginning of the movie, he's told he's the one that's going to save them and liberate them, and he's been training for it, he's been making strides, he's been great, and then he's suddenly told, no, that's not right, that's wrong. And it's completely subverting what he was expecting and thinking. The next beat that you want to have in your story structure, in this basic 5-point story structure, is the climax. This is going to be when the conflict between the villain of the story and the hero of the story comes to a head. This is going to be the big battle, the big confrontation. It's going to be where everything's out in the open. Your protagonist or a hero has to finally decide, are they going to continue believing that lie that they have been challenging the entire book? Or are they going to accept the truth and realize what has actually been messing up their life and use that newfound truth to defeat the villain and save the day? And no, the villain does not have to be a person. It could be a problem. It could be themselves. A lot of times this can happen. It's their actual literal misbelief that they're tackling, but you can do this in any story. It can be something simple, like here's an example. So stories where someone who say their mother abandoned them when they were younger for reasons good or not. And then she suddenly comes back to town and they have to decide if they're going to forgive her. The villain in that story is going to be their unwillingness to forgive. It can be their mother as a literal villain, but the real villain is going to be the conflict that comes out of that. And that is what they're going to overcome in the climax. And then the next beat that is going to be in this 5-point story structure is going to be the resolution, or sometimes called the epilogue. But not every story needs an epilogue, so resolution is generally what it's called. But it's basically your heroes have saved the day, they've won, they've destroyed Mordor, they've defeated Agent Smith. Now you get to see how far your heroes come, how far your protagonist has come since the beginning. This will be that final image I mentioned that you can have mirror the opening image, the introduction. In the Lord of the Rings movie, the last movie, the resolution is they've destroyed Mordor and Sauron, and Frodo's waking up in Rivendell, his friends around him, they've all survived, and then he goes to the boats to leave. That's your resolution. That is the resolving of the story of the conflict. That's what you meet. Introduction, introduce your characters, whether they're one or two. Inciting incident, what is going to push them out of their comfort zone and make them go on this journey of transformation. The midpoint, what is going to turn this upside down. They thought they had it figured out, and now they have this whole new thing to tackle. It's going to challenge their misbelief. The climax, where they've realized that the problem in their lives is something inherent within themselves. They have misbelieved about the world that they need to go ahead and fix for themselves instead of going after a material want. Climax, they defeat the bad guy, and the resolution, what happens after they defeat the bad guy. The proof that they have actually changed on this journey. The climax is them proving it to themselves and them around them. The resolution, you can think of it as them proving to the readers that they have actually transformed and gone on this journey. One of the aspects that I struggle with a lot, I can outline and brain dump and get like really great plot elements, and usually the main character has a pretty good through line, but then along the way I tend to start dropping subplots and like romantic plot, and it suddenly stops making sense why these two end up together, and this is going to help you not do that. This is going to be similar to what I did on the character sheet that I filled out for you in this video up here, usually just for the two main characters, because at this point I mostly just want to make sure that the two people that are supposed to be romantically interested in each other end up together organically and still have their own arcs to go on that intertwine together until they meet together, and they just help balance each other and complete each other. In a Google Sheet document, I will have my main character and then the love interest character. I will fill out their arcs depending on these beats. And this can vary depending on if you're doing like enemies to lovers, best friends to lovers, doing a slow burn, but there's a couple of really main basic beats. First, you need to introduce your characters, and normally what I will do is I will start with the main point of view character that I'm writing from, and if you want to do a dual point of view, you can do the first chapter from your main character and then the second from the love interest character's point of view, and use those to introduce them. And then in the rows where I'm talking about main character 1 and main character 2, I will write above that beat where they are emotionally. And this is going to be the starting point of that misbelief that we talked about. Whatever they misbelieve about the world, we're going to put in that box. It could be something really brief. For example, for one of my characters, I have he's arrogant, he's strict, he's focused on an immediate goal, and he's not really considering how his actions to get to that goal affect the people around him. And then, this is a really great way, because then you can jump to the end of your arc and you can write in what they're going to become. And you should be able to pull all of this from your character template if you followed along with last week's video. And this will let you fill in the blanks. Some basic story plots, especially for romance. You want the introductions. You need to have the meet cute, is what a lot of people refer to it as, or if you have an enemies to lover arc, the meet hate, and just get that chemistry started from the get-go so that your readers are like, oh, okay, that's who's going to end up together. Now I want to see how they go from this to this. There's going to be some reason that these characters don't think that they should fall in love, or they don't deserve love, or whatever have you, and you're going to want a beat to figure this out for one of the characters, and then later on you're going to have another one for the other character, or just a reiteration for that main point of view character if you're not doing dual point of view. And then they're going to hang out together, they're going to be forced to work together and be around each other, and they're going to start being like, oh, well, this is kind of cool, actually, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it could have been, until the midpoint where they're finally like, oh, okay, I kind of like this person. And maybe they don't want to admit it yet, depending on how drawn out you want the arc to be, but there's definitely more of a connection there. But that would be too easy if halfway through your book everything was fine and dandy, right? This is why in the last video I had you figure out what your character's greatest fear was. Once you've got them together, everything's going good, they're getting along, they're like, oh, well, maybe I do deserve love. It's gonna get torn apart. As writers, we just love torturing our characters. You're gonna ruin everything for their relationship because before they can truly be happy with each other, before they can truly change, well, one, as a relationship, they need to figure out who they are by themselves. They need to change individually before they can make each other whole. This is when in the story there's that big breakup scene that you know isn't going to stick, because then after that they realize how much they miss the other one, and then you have that grand gesture, like think like rom-coms. You have like the boombox in the air. I think my cat is scratching. Anyway, that moment, and that is just basic for character arcs in romance specifically. The biggest problem that I've run into in my writing journey is not knowing what goes next. And as I said in the last video, your outline is going to help you avoid this problem, and it's going to help you have the momentum to push forward, and it's going to make sure your pacing's on track, your character arcs are there. But it's important to go ahead and think of the structure as a whole and consider what's going to come while you're planning one part of the structure, and it'll get easier the more you do it. This is going to be the first plot point that I mentioned in those 5 beats that are really important, and that is going to be what is sometimes called the opening image. It's called the introduction. Some people call it the hook, and this is really just getting your readers to engage with the main character or your protagonist. So you're going to introduce them in some way that is compelling. You are going to make sure that you've established what their lie is, what they misbelieve about the world, and you're going to establish how that's messing up their life and it's causing them problems. It might be getting in the way of what they want, or at least what they believe that they want, and you're going to show what they want. This does not all have to happen in this one section. There is a beat later on, and you're going to do these in the next few scenes that happen before the inciting incident, especially. In this first beat, think of it as the first thing that you're going to see. If it was like a movie, it'd be that first shot. And it's really just going to establish who your character is, why your readers should relate to them or care in some way. Your character doesn't necessarily need to be likable, but they do need to be relatable and compelling in some way. Overall, you want to show what isn't right in their life. The reader should be getting a hint that something isn't right, because they will notice if it's missing. You need to hint at the journey that they are going to go on. That way they have some investment in them. They understand what they're putting their time and effort into reading and following along with. Normally this beat is going to be visual, so you want to focus on showing versus telling. And yes, telling does have its place in the writing world. You've probably heard the term show, don't tell. But there is a place for telling, you just need to know when it is. But this beat is all about showing. You want to immerse your readers in your point of view character's head, their world, what they're struggling with, and you want to show what their internal conflict is, what they're going to be battling this entire book. What do you want to think about with this beat? What is your character's misbelief and what is their lie? How is that interacting with what they want? What do they want? What do they think is going to make them happy? What are their flaws? Are they on display? Can your readers pinpoint them? How is this opening image going to be indicative of who your character is and who they might become? Is it interesting? Does it spark curiosity? Will it keep the reader riveted enough to get to the inciting incident, the exciting beat? And when your character finally gets to the inciting incident, are your readers going to know why it matters to them? And that really is the biggest part that I want to emphasize about story and story structure. Yes, you want to outline your plot and you want to know what your plot is, but you always want to tap back into who your character is and why this matters, why it affects them the way it does. Because the heart of your story is going to be your character and who they are as a person. Otherwise, the plot could just be happening, and why is your reader going to care? It's kind of like the difference between being in like a historical event and reading about it in a textbook. And a lot of that is because we don't have a personal stake in what's happening. We don't have something we can relate with or empathize with generally. The next beat that you want to think about, if you have another point of view character, introducing them / the love interest. However, you can go ahead and mesh this with another beat that I'm going to talk about, the meet cute. In this beat, you kind of want to establish the same things as the previous beat. You want to make sure that it's an interesting introduction. For every new character, you want to make sure their introduction is interesting or compelling. unless it's the minor characters we talked about in this video. But really, you want to have the reader thinking about, why would this pairing work? Why do we care about this character? And you want to establish, especially if you're doing multiple point of views and a romantic love interest arc, you want to establish the characters and who they are before they're together. Because as I said in the last week's video, it's very important for them to change individually before they can change as a partner, even though they will have some influence on making those changes occur. Now, if you aren't writing a romance and you aren't writing multiple point of views, you can skip this beat. As I said in the last video, some of these can be kind of like extra beats. Modify this as you need, or if you feel like something doesn't click with you, it doesn't feel right for your story, experiment with taking it out. The next beat you want to think about is generally called the setup. In the setup, it's multiple scenes, so it's starting from the opening image or the introduction, and it's going to the inciting incident. This I got from Save the Cat, which if you guys haven't read that book, you should totally check it out. It's incredibly helpful. But basically, in this stretch of the novel, before the inciting incident, you want to introduce your main characters, you want to introduce your supporting characters, and you want to introduce the misbeliefs, the flaws, the wants, and basically give the readers a feeling of where the story is going. You are establishing the status quo. That way they understand where the change is coming from. If you start your story at the inciting incident and you don't have anything explaining why this is so impactful for your character, it won't hit as hard. They won't understand why this is forcing a change. So things to ask yourself for this beat. Have you shown what the status quo is? And have you shown what's wrong with it? And you also want to think about showing your character in multiple aspects of their life. This is because we are not always the same person around different people. We are always ourselves, but we swap out masks. So, for example, I'm going to be very different with my boss at work than I am with my best friend I've known since like kindergarten. So some examples of these is you want to show your character at home generally, so how they are with their family, or if they don't have a family, you want to show that because you want to hint at their relationships and how that has influenced them, how they are with other people that they love, their closest people. You want to show them at what is called work, and this can be an actual job, or it can be, if they're like a high school student, it would be their school life. Basically their responsibilities. And you also want to think about showing them at play. Who are they and how are they reacting when they're just being themselves, just going out and having fun and hanging out? What do they do in their downtime? Do not take this as writing a scene that has nothing to do with the story. You still want all of it to connect. And really it's just showing the different facets of the character so the reader can better understand what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, and then why that's going to have to change depending on the inciting incident that's going to happen. Another very important thing before we get into the next main plot point, you want to make sure you've established a goal for your character. Okay, now this goal is probably going to shift or change depending on the inciting incident, but if you don't have a goal at the beginning of the story, there's not going to be anything driving your character forward. And it's going to be very flat, very passive, and it probably won't be very engaging. It won't give you much place to go. And when you're asking yourself how your character would react and why they would think this or do this, it's not going to work. Okay. And then the next beat is that second main beat that I talked about in the last video, and that is the inciting incident. It is sometimes called the catalyst, and then this is also generally a meet cute moment, which you can either have here or you can have somewhere in the setup section, depending on if you're writing a straight romance or if you're using these kind of romantic subplot beats to go ahead and help with and interweaving character relationships. So the inciting incident is what is going to force your character to start on the path of change. We talked about it a little bit in the last video, but I wanted to give you some things to think about for this section specifically, some questions to ask yourself. Why does the inciting incident matter to your main character or your protagonist? Why does it matter specifically to them? Why is it going to affect them the way it is rather than just the way it would affect everybody? How does it push them outside their comfort zone? How does it force them to change and shift what they're doing and how they're doing it? What conflict is going to arise because of this inciting incident or catalyst? Also note that the inciting incident doesn't have to be like someone died or a bomb went off or the aliens invaded. It should be bad and catastrophic to your character, but can appear to be a good thing, but it's actually going to be a very bad thing. The main thing that you want the inciting incident to do is to disrupt the status quo, because the status quo is what is keeping them trapped in their misbelief and in their flaws. It's stopping them from being the better person that they can be. This will of course change depending on the arc that you're talking about, which if you want to know more about those, you can check this video out here. But for the purposes of this video, I'm probably mostly going to be talking about the positive arc that is probably the most well known. The next beat that you want to think about is sometimes called the debate beat, or I like to call it the impossible choice or question. And basically what this is going to do is you've established the status quo for your readers and your character. Basically, they're going to have the option to stay in the status quo and continue to be miserable and continue to have that flaw that is ruining their life without them realizing it, or they can shift their goal and their method of getting that goal and move forward, stepping outside their comfort zone, doing something they probably normally wouldn't do to achieve their goal and improve their life. Remember, they're going after their want, which is actually not what they need, but they think it's what's going to make them happy. If you want to know more about that, you can check out this video here. This can also, if your character for whatever reason in the inciting incident made a decision already, they're already doing something else, this can also sometimes be a preparation beat. So think of like in Lord of the Rings, they've had the council, they've decided they're going to go take the ring to Mordor. This is in itself a type of preparation beat if you are looking at the character arc of anyone in the Fellowship, like Legolas, Gimli. So after that council, now that they've decided to go do the thing and take the ring to Mordor, they have to prepare for that journey. They had to get supplies, they had to make sure they said their goodbyes, most likely. I will say, however, having some sort of decision-making element in this beat is going to make your story more active, just because they actively have to choose what they're doing, how they're stepping forward, how they're moving forward, versus the preparation scene and gathering the supplies, gathering the allies. This can sometimes be a little boring if you don't write it correctly, so just keep that in mind. A note about the meet cute. In this beat, for the romance part of it, you have the two main characters interacting together, the two love interests interacting together, and they're generally brought together by external forces or by chance or life event, and it's just you starting the chemistry between them. You're letting the readers know that there's something going to happen here. You want them to start rooting for these characters now. Even if this is actually a meet hate instead of a meet cute, if you're writing an enemies to lover, you want to make sure that you establish that they really don't like each other. Some tips for this: you want to make it memorable, both for the characters and also the readers. It's that moment that they are going to always think about. You want to hint at how these characters are going to be good for each other and why now is very much not the time for it. There should be some idea of conflict between them, a reason why they can't just get together now, whether you're doing enemies to lovers or just strangers to lovers. You want to establish that there's something in the way, which is going to be part of them overcoming things and defeating those obstacles. The next plot point is going to be about how your character is reacting to the inciting incident. And a lot of times this kind of meshes with the debate beat. This is also a beat that you can use in your romance arc if you're writing one, and it's basically one or both of the characters having some form of them saying, this isn't going to happen, I'm not going to fall in love, I'm not going to make this connection or form these connections for whatever reason. And it's just letting them saying it's going to not happen now or ever, and especially not with the love interest character that they met. You need to know what the reason that they are not going to fall in love is, or why they don't feel like they're going to, or whatever this beat is for. And you want to understand how your character is going to react to the inciting incident given their misbelief about themselves or the world around them. This leads us to the next beat, which is an optional beat. Sometimes I add it, sometimes I don't. I got this one from Abby Emmons and her 3-act story structure. It's a pinch point moment, and you can put these throughout your story, in my opinion. But it's basically just you hinting at the antagonist of the story. If you're writing a hero-villain tale, you're going to hint at something that the villain's doing. This is going to end Act 1 of our story. In the next beat, sometimes called the break into two, the new world beat, this is basically a moment when they are stepping into that new world. This can be a literal new world. This moment in The Matrix is when Neo makes the choice to wake up from the dream and enter reality. And he wakes up in a pod with robots, and he is literally in a completely different world than he was previously. So it can be literal, or it can be more of an emotional standpoint. For whatever reason, they are now unfamiliar in the familiar. It's generally something they aren't going to be able to reverse. The inciting incident has changed them. Not yet completely or in the way that we're going to have them change, but it has changed them, and it has changed things for them. Like I said earlier, they're generally going to have a new goal or a new plan from before. And by new plan, I mean they have the same goal, but they have a different way of achieving it. Because whatever happened at the inciting incident made it so what they were doing before wasn't going to work anymore. This is also the moment in your story, if you're doing a romantic plot, where your two characters who either hate each other if you're doing enemies to lover, or they kind of like each other but definitely don't want to go on have a relationship or anything like that, when they are forced to be together. They are forced to work together or partner together or interact with each other. This is going to raise the stakes for them, and it's going to define both of their goals, especially if their goals are in opposition and they have to work together even though they're in opposition. And make sure that whatever this is, whatever event has happened to make them forced to work together, it's something that can't be resolved by one or the other by themselves. They have to resolve it together. The next beat is like the one earlier, it's called the no way beat. This is just a second reiteration of that, and that can either be your second love interest, especially if you're doing multiple point of views. That can be them reiterating that they don't want to fall in love for whatever reason, or it can be that if you're doing one point of view, it can be that same character again being like, no, this isn't going to happen. But this is weakening. The fact that they've had to say it again means that their resolve in that regard is weakening. The next beat is generally called the fun and games, and this is going to expand throughout a good chunk of your second act. And this is basically the premise that's going to be on the back of your book. So the competition is going to happen, the trials. This is where your subplots are going to be, your side arcs, your side characters are going to have their chance to shine here. So in Lord of the Rings, that is going to be in the second Lord of the Rings movie, going after Pippin and Merry and breaking from the Fellowship. Everything there ended up being side plots and subplots because the main story in those movies is Frodo taking the ring to Mordor. One thing to note is you want to make sure that these subplots help develop your main character's skills that are going to help them defeat the main antagonist in their misbelief. I also generally in this section, this will be more of a single beat for the romance side of things, I will include actually it can just be throughout this whole section, but through whatever's happening, the two love interests, they're starting to get a feeling, or if you're doing one main point of view, you're starting to get a feeling that maybe this isn't as bad as they thought it was. Maybe there could be something here and it might actually work. The arguments they had in those two no way beats, those start to get challenged here. And then going through that romance arc, continuing throughout scenes, you're going to want to show how their feelings are developing for each other and deepening for each other. They're going to begin to question their first opinions of each other, especially if this is enemies to lover, which makes sure that in an enemies to lover, you want them to become friends before they become lovers, just so it's more organic. You want to make sure that you understand what actions and what events are going to force them to realize that they were wrong the first time around about their opinions of this person. And then that's going to bring us to our third main story structure glue, and that is the midpoint. This is the halfway mark of our story. And this is generally a plot twist that's going to upend everything. It's going to make your protagonist or protagonists question everything up until this point. It's generally unexpected, and it's going to change the path that they are on, the method they're using. At this beat, it's important to know that they haven't fully changed, but they're starting to realize that they might need to change. This is when you start to shift from the character going after what they want and gravitating towards what they actually need. And this is also an important beat in a romance arc. This is generally when they start to think that it's going to work out and they can actually have it all, have this relationship, or they've fully realized that they're going to be fast friends. Basically, they're on that edge of that knife and they are falling in love, whether they admit it or not, or realize it or not, depending on how slow you want that arc to be. After the midpoint, you are going to want to have moments where you challenge that confirmation to each other in the midpoint, where they are friends, they start to like each other, they allow themselves to be vulnerable with each other. You're going to challenge that because they're not ready to transform yet. They aren't ready to tackle their own misbeliefs, and so that's getting in the way of them fully accepting and being vulnerable with the other. This doubt is going to deepen as the story unfolds until it's percolating in the back of their mind. And this is because as they shift from their want to their need, they are increasingly having to confront their misbelief and their flaws. This means they're going to instinctually fall back on their bad habits, which is going to interfere with their relationship. Because if, let's say, their misbelief is they aren't worthy of being loved, and then they're with this person who says they love them. Well, they don't believe they're worthy of love, and then they're having to confront it and face that, and they don't believe that in their soul. They can't accept what the other person is giving them, and that's going to cause tension and conflict and doubt. And they're going to start doubting the person's sincerity and their actions, and begin to wonder if there's something else going on behind the scenes that they don't know yet. And if you have any further questions, drop them in the comments below. I will try to type and write more coherently than I speak. And note, this does not mean that they aren't in a relationship and that relationship isn't growing, just that in the back of their head, they are doubting the relationship already. And this is, of course, going to lead to them retreating from the relationship. Eventually, their doubt is going to grow to the point where they do not want to step forward and proceed. They don't want the confirmation that they've been right this entire time. They don't want to risk realizing that they were correct and that they aren't worthy of love. And so they're not going to try at all. Now, this isn't going to just happen. There should be an actual event that causes them to have that trust broken. It should intersect with their internal beliefs, their lie. And then you want to consider how your protagonist or protagonists are going to express this. And after the midpoint, it's important to think about how your protagonist is going to react to whatever happened in the midpoint. And just like the inciting incident spawned, just as the inciting incident spawned a new goal for your character, the midpoint is also going to give them a new goal or a new plan to go after their goal. Generally, this is a good time to shift gears, though, because like I said, they're going from their want to their need. But you basically want to establish how your character thinks this new plan is going to work and why it's still not quite the right way to go about things. Because they're still not confronting their misbelief or their lie or the thing that's actually damaging their life. They're still trying to fix it with outside, usually material things. And then once this happens, you have a choice of you can have another scene where you hint at the bad guys and that getting darker, the antagonist is getting closer, your character, your protagonist, they're getting closer to having to face their misbelief and actually confront that. And at the same time, they are also really putting up their guard in the relationship, if you have a relationship in your story. And they're really starting to put the brakes down for that. And a lot of times this can happen because of like a worst case scenario. Whatever they were telling themselves in the no way beats maybe comes to pass. One beat that's kind of fun to do sometimes is it's a supposed victory beat. Basically, your main character thinks that they're about to get what they've wanted, what they've been striving for and going after this entire time, and they think they're going to get what they want, but they really aren't. And for this, you want to establish why do they think they've been victorious and why do they think they're so close to achieving that goal. The next beat is the all is lost beat. This is the worst thing that could happen to your main character. And if you want to go back to that fear that we talked about in this video up here about character development, that is the worst thing that could happen to this character. This is generally rooted in their misbelief, and it is generally their fault because they have been ignoring what's actually wrong in their life and striving for this thing. Over here, it's been piling up and they've been making the wrong decisions and it backfires. So you want to make sure that this event forces them to confront their misbelief. It forces them to realize that they had a hand in having it happen. And you want to show the readers that this is rock bottom for your character. And at the same time, this is generally in a romance arc when the breakup happens, but this is when all of that doubt explodes and they call it quits. And after the all is lost moment, you're going to have, it's sometimes called the dark moment or the dark night of the soul. And this is basically their reaction. You had the inciting incident, and that was an action and an immediate reaction that happened to that. And then you had the debate, which is them reacting to the inciting incident and internalizing that. This is basically the same concept. You're going to have that all is lost, which is the event itself that happens to bring them to rock bottom. And then you have the dark night of the soul, which is where they have to internalize and come to grips with whatever happened. Sometimes your character will just react emotionally to this. Sometimes they'll attempt to return to their status quo, the old world, and then realize that they don't fit there anymore because they have grown and they have changed on this journey, just haven't finished yet. And then in a romance arc, this is generally the moment where your characters realize that they were kind of stupid for breaking up and they're actually more miserable now that they're not in the relationship because they never gave it an actual shot and it didn't fix what they thought was wrong. And then your character has a light bulb moment. They realize, and this can sometimes be called a catharsis moment, it can be the aha moment, but they finally realize what they've been missing. They finally realize why all of this is happening and why their decisions have been leading them down this path, what they need to do to actually fix their problems. So you want to think about how they overcome the lie and continue to the climax, and then make sure you understand what lesson they need to learn, which if you followed the character template video, that's going to be what their truth is. And this is going to lead into the climax, which is the battle scene between the big bad and the misbelief, that the internal battle with their misbelief and proving to themselves that they have actually changed and shifted. And this can be several scenes. It usually is several scenes. You can have them gathering the allies. You can have them preparing for the big battle, especially if your all is lost or dark moment had them ditching their friends, the people that were with them, or having them be left behind or betraying someone. With the all is lost moment, usually, most times, your character is going to end up alone because their actions have led them here and it is no one's fault but their own. And they've pushed all these people away and they've guarded themselves so closely, so tightly, that they didn't let anyone in. So now they're alone. In the climax moment, in this section of the book, they have to go mend the bridges they burned, or at least try to. Sometimes you won't be able to, and that'll be a learning lesson for them in and of itself. And once they get the group back together, once they make their amends, they say their sorries, they figure out what they need to do. They have to make the plan to do the do. They can't just bust into the bad guy's lair and win. They actually have to plan. And then, of course, you have them go and they fight the bad guy, and the bad guy almost wins. And then they dig deep inside themselves and they make the decision based on their new truth, goes against their lie and their misbelief, and that lets them overcome the villain. This is also the section of your book where you'll have that grand gesture that we talked about in the last video to help mend that bridge, especially with the love interest, especially if there was any form of miscommunication or betrayal. Basically, this is them proving to themselves that they've transformed, and you want to make sure that it's going to help them win the battle. And then they win, at least the internal battle. Remember, your characters don't have to defeat every villain, and they're not going to, especially if you're writing a series. You want to make sure that your characters are still transforming in each book, but you might leave it open-ended at the end and have another inciting incident kind of thing happen, another plot twist. But there should still be an internal battle that was won. And with the climax and the battle, make sure that however your protagonist defeats the bad guy or wins the battle, make sure that whatever your character does, it is informed by their truth and is very clearly different from what they would have done at the beginning of the book when they were being motivated by their misbelief and making their decisions based on that lens. And then finally, you have that final image, that resolution moment, which is just wrapping up loose ends, showing that they have won and what comes after, proving to the readers that the character has changed, showing how far the main character has come and how they're different. A lot of writers like to use the final image to mirror the opening image, but flip it on its head so you can see how their world is now right. And like I said, if you're writing a series, then this might be another plot twist moment, but you should still have some threads that close, some resolution here, but you can have a cliffhanger to lead into the next book. And then in that grand gesture beat around the climax, that is also generally going to be when they kiss. You have that first kiss scene, that epic kiss moment in a movie. That's generally where that's going to land. You also want to make sure you show how the two characters have changed on their own to better each other in a relationship and how they complete each other. And then in that resolution, that finale, in your romance arc, you also want to show how they are with each other now, how far their relationship has come. They're going to have a different perspective and a new way of looking at the world, and hopefully they'll be interacting very differently with each other than they did in their first introduction. You probably want a little bit of conflict here still, but just enough so that it's light and just enough to keep things intriguing. In some books, this is the wedding scene when it all comes to a head, or they're finally together, those scenes. Just anything to show how their connection has deepened and improved. And there you have it. That is the story structure that I've put together. I hope this helped. And like I said earlier, if any of these beats don't work with your story, as long as you have that backbone that we talked about in the prior video, as long as you have your character starting with status quo, have something, an event happen to force them out of their status quo and on the path of change, a midpoint to flip everything on its head and force them to realize that what they're doing isn't working, their want isn't going to satisfy their need. You want to have a moment that brings them to their greatest low and forces them to realize that they have made mistakes and it's generally their fault. The big climax scene, so them overcoming that misbelief, and then a resolution to wrap everything up and give that cathartic release and conclusion and closure to this arc that you've created. If you have all of those elements, then you will be set, and you can pick and choose any of the other things that might be helpful for you to keep you on track with your story. And yeah, do what works best for you, and let me know below if this was helpful. Until next time.